So welcome back to the church history study.
Bienvenidos a estudio de la historia de la iglesia.
So today, last week we talked about Constantine and how he, in his lifelong conversion to Christianity.
Entonces la semana pasada estuvimos hablando de Constantino y toda su conversión por toda su vida.
Which was the start of what we call as Christendom.
Y eso era el empiezo de cristianidad.
And so the church obviously went through a huge change during the 4th century.
Entonces, obviamente que había un cambio en el primer siglo.
So that's what we're going to talk about
¿El
today.
primer siglo? No.
The 4th century.
Por la 4 siglo.
So we're going to talk about the rise of Christendom.
Entonces vamos a hablar de eso, ascenso de cristiandad.
But historically, the church has had three approaches to imperialism. What is imperialism? If you define imperialism, what would you define it as?
En ese momento había tres diferentes puntos de vista de imperialismo. Si usted iba a definir imperialismo, ¿cómo sería tu definición?
What is an empire?
¿Cuál es un emperador?
One ruler.
One ruler.
Mm-hmm.
Solo un reino o un rey.
What else would you guys say? What is imperialism? Somebody said define that for
Es
me.
imperialismo. Definición de imperialismo. Para ti. Para ti.
It's a belief in the country or state, isn't it? The empire.
So what's the empire?
Well, this is the Roman Empire, isn't it?
Well, we're studying about the Roman Empire, but there were other empires throughout history.
Entonces, ¿cómo es un emperador?
So, there have been three traditional ways, but an empire or imperialism is one country's attempt to extend power and maintain that power in another land.
Okay.
So that's
Un imperialismo o un imperio es un país que está intentando dominar o tener el poder de un país o todos los países.
just over another land.
Entonces, dominio por otro terreno.
So Italy, Rome, and Roman Empire as an example, exerting its power over other countries.
Entonces, como Roma, que estaba el imperialismo, era dominar otro terreno o otros países.
So imperialism can be in the form of military conquering or political change or economic control of another country.
Entonces, eso puede ser económicamente, políticamente.
And so, I mean, there are examples of modern empires today. Some people would claim that, some have claimed that the United States is an empire because we exert power over other nations, or the European Union is a type of empire because they exert power over other nations.
Entonces hay gente que dice en el día actual que hay mucha gente que piensa que los Estados Unidos es como un imperio porque nosotros tenemos influencia o poder por otros países. Y también en Inglaterra también tiene diferente poder por diferentes países, entonces eso puede ser como un imperio.
And so imperialism is any time one nation or state exerts power over another.
Entonces cualquier momento que un país está dominando a otro país.
And historically, God's people have treated imperialism differently at different times in history.
Entonces, por la historia, en los cristianos se ha tratado imperialismo diferente en diferentes épocas de la historia.
And so, when I say God's people, I mean the Jews in the Old Testament and Christians.
Entonces, cuando él dice la gente de Dios, son también los judíos del Antiguo Testamento, pero también los cristianos del Nuevo Testamento.
So the three ways is that they have viewed is that, where is that? Well, I don't have it written here. Oh, there it is. So traditionally, there's three ways. The first way is to reinforce the empire.
And
Reinforce the existence of the empire.
La primera cosa del imperialismo es reforzarse el imperio.
So reinforce its existence as being in existence through the power of God.
Reforzarse que existe el imperio por medio del poder de Dios.
The second is to subvert it.
Y la otra es subvertirla.
And the third is to define it.
Y la última es definirlo.
So I want to give one example of each. The first example is Isaiah 45:1. This is an example of reinforcing the empire.
Entonces, en Isaías 45:1 es un ejemplo en la escritura de cómo puede reforzarse un imperio.
Can somebody read 45:1?
Si alguien puede leer Isaías 45:1.
Thus says Yahweh to the anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand hath held, to subdue nations before him, and strip kings in their armor, to open the doors before him, and the gates shall not be shut.
This is a really interesting verse, and you guys have probably never even noticed this before.
Es muy interesante, puede ser que nunca te has dado cuenta de ese versículo.
Here we see King Cyrus, the king of the Persian Empire, being referred to by the prophet Isaiah as what?
Shall we read in Spanish?
Yeah,
For the
you can read in Spanish if you want.
speakers, Así dice el Señor a Ciro, su ungido, a quien tomó de la mano derecha para someter a su dominio las naciones y despojar de su armadura a los reyes, para abrir a su paso las puertas y dejar abiertas las entradas.
How does Isaiah describe King Cyrus?
Entonces, ¿cómo está definiendo, Isaías está definiendo a Ciro, el rey?
Anointed.
And what does that word mean? What is that in Hebrew?
¿Qué significa que él está ungido? ¿Qué significa ungido?
Messiah,
Significa Mesías.
God's Messiah in his right hand. He describes King Cyrus, the king of Persia, as God's Messiah, as his anointed one. That's what Messiah means.
Como el que está ungido.
And so here, it's very interesting. You guys probably have never seen that before, but governments are instruments of God.
Entonces, en esa situación, el gobierno fue un instrumento de mano de Dios.
And so last week, I don't remember if we did this on the video or not, but we talked about Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. Did we do this on the video or did we do this after
Entonces,
video?
la semana pasada estuvimos hablando de Romanos capítulo
On the
13,
video?
versículo
Yeah,
1
okay.
a 8.
So we won't reread that, but last week we saw how God describes the government, which is when in power at the time as the Roman government, as God's ministers.
Que estaba explicando por medio de esa escritura como el gobierno era ministro de Dios.
People who've been appointed by God,
Gente
been given
que
their authority.
fueron nombrados por medio de Dios.
So this is an example of how God's people have often reinforced imperialism.
Entonces es un ejemplo de cómo la gente de Dios ha reforzado el imperio.
So the second way that God, people has responded to imperialism is to subvert it.
Y la segunda, la forma que la gente de Dios ha respondido era subvertirla.
Jesus did this a lot because whenever he talked about his kingdom that is not of earth, he was undermining the empire at the time, the Roman Empire.
Entonces, cuando Jesús estaba hablando de su reino, a veces cuando era como que él estaba subvirtiendo el reino que era el reino romano.
And almost all apocalyptic literature, including especially the book of Revelation, subverts the empire, the imperialism.
Y mucho de la literatura apocalíptica sí está subvirtiendo al imperio de momento.
And so we begin to see in the 4th century that after Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, that God's people begin to define the imperialism.
En el 4 siglo podremos ver como la gente de Dios ya están definiendo el imperio.
So Christendom is basically the rise of the empire of Christianity or Christian imperialism.
cristiandad, entonces el ascenso de cristiandad es básicamente el imperio del cristianismo,
So basically, the empire being defined through Christianity.
definando al imperio por medio del cristianismo.
So who's got thoughts over those three types of reaction to the imperialism?
Entonces, ¿quién tiene pensamiento de eso? O preguntas.
Comments? Questions?
Can I just ask, the three were reinforce,
Uh-huh.
second,
Subvert,
subvert, and
define. So, okay, there are no questions. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to make it more exciting here. So, the church after Constantine does not look like the church before Constantine.
Entonces, la iglesia después de Constantino no es parecido de la iglesia antes de Constantino.
The church before Constantine was poor, temporally powerless, persecuted, and premillennial.
La iglesia antes de Constantino era pobre, sin poder, perseguido y pre-milenial.
And in the church after Constantine was prosperous, powerful, protected, and post-millennial.
La iglesia después de Constantino fue una iglesia que fue próspero, poderoso, protegido y post-milenial.
So let's go to the bishops and talk about the power.
Entonces vamos a hablar de los obispos y el poder que tenía.
So in the Roman Empire, pagan priests had tax exemption status. They didn't have to
Entonces
pay
durante
taxes.
el tiempo del Imperio Romano, los sacerdotes que eran paganos tuvieron el poder.
And in the 4th century, as Christian bishops began taking the place of the pagan priests, they began to get this tax exempt status.
Entonces, esos sacerdotes que eran paganos antes no tenían que pagar impuestos. Y en el 4 siglo, cuando ya están subiendo los obispos en el sitio o el puesto de esos sacerdotes de antes, ellos tampoco tenían que pagar impuestos.
And how many bishops do you think was at the start of when Christianity became
¿Cuántos
legal? How many?
obispos había durante el tiempo de Constantino?
There were 1,800 bishops in the Roman Empire.
Wow, había 1800.
Now they all became tax exempt.
Y todos 1800 no tenían que pagar impuestos.
So Christian ministers in the 4th century started going from being poor to prosperous.
Entonces la iglesia en ese siglo fue desde ser pobre hasta mucho más próspero.
How do you think the early church saw wealth
¿Tú cómo piensas que la iglesia primitiva
in
de
terms of
antes
salvation?
ha visto a la riqueza? ¿En qué forma? En eso, terminología de salvación.
Was-
Yo pensaba
Right now, rewards from God.
en
Yeah.
The early church,
la iglesia
before
primitiva
Constantine.
que pensaba de ser rico, básicamente.
not part
Because
of
they were giving up their lives.
It's an obstacle to salvation.
Entonces fue opuesto para ellos de la salvación.
Jesus says it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom than for
Siempre decía que
camel to-
más difícil para un hombre
what is it,
rico
Audrey?
entrar
Quote for me.
a el cielo
camel to enter
que
into
un
the
camelo
eye of
entrar por el aguja,
Con el ojo de un camello, no con el ojo de un
por el
camello.
ojo de la
No.
But after Constantine, wealth started to be seen, as H said, as a reward, as divine favor.
Because of persecution, presumably.
No, because it was just seen as divine favor if you were prosperous.
Entonces después de Constantino era diferente el punto de vista de la iglesia, que ya ha cambiado su punto de vista a ver la gente que era más rico y pensaba que esa gente ya tenía el favor de Dios.
So the church was split, and that's what I want you guys to see, is the church becomes split in the 4th century.
Entonces la iglesia en su forma de pensar está como separado o dividido en su forma de pensar.
Because the old school ministers didn't go away.
Porque la gente que era de la iglesia primitiva de antes de Constantino todavía estaba.
And they rebelled against the new order.
Y ellos no les gustó esa orden nueva.
And so this gave rise to monasticism, the monks. They would go out into the wilderness and live an ascetic lifestyle.
Entonces mucho de la gente quería ser monástico, que era como vivir una vida separada.
We'll talk about monasticism later.
Eso sería más adelante.
So bishops were, before Constantine, were pastoral. That was their main job, to be like pastors.
Entonces los obispos antes de Constantino eran más como pastores.
After Constantine, they become more like political figures, ruling dioceses, areas of the Roman Empire.
Pero después de Constantino era más como gente administrador y gobernando.
So they
el
become
reino.
like politicians.
Entonces más como político.
So remember, under Constantine now, there's no separation of church and state. Before Constantine, there was complete separation from the church and the state. Now there is no separation of church and
Entonces
state.
recuérdate que antes de Constantino había separación entre el Estado y la Iglesia, pero después de Constantino ya no había separación.
And so from 4th century on, for the next 1,000 years, there will be no separation of church and state.
Entonces, desde ese momento, en el 4 siglos, por los próximos 400 años, no vamos a ver ninguna separación entre la Iglesia y el Estado.
And it's really hard to see the line between spiritual and temporal or worldly authority.
Así que es difícil ver cuál es el gobernando espiritualmente y gobernando por el imperio.
I've got a question because I didn't get it very well. Then after Constantino, the bishops start to pay taxes?
No.
They didn't. But before Constantino, they pay taxes.
Sí.
Like
That's
everybody.
why they were poor.
Like everybody though.
Right.
Everybody paid.
Yeah.
But it's still
But
the
then,
same.
because before Constantine, the bishops, the priests that
Yeah.
were not paying taxes were the pagan priests, because that was the official religion.
Yeah.
But then it was the bishops that
Yeah.
didn't pay.
But they stay like that for
1,000 years.
until today.
hmm So,
It was very comparable, this to Old Testament.
mhm,
David, Solomon.
right. And some have
Come back to the king
Right.
and religion.
And some say that that time period was a time of imperialism for Israel
Right.
because they conquered land. Joshua conquered the land, conquered the Canaanites. And so they refer to that as the Mosaic
Entonces,
imperialism.
como Josué y toda esa gente han conquistado la tierra prometida, en esa época también era como un imperio por Israel.
And so before Constantine, the basilicas were the government meeting places for the Roman Empire. After Constantine, these are now the churches.
Entonces, antes era como un sitio para tener reuniones por el gobierno y después de Constantino fueron como iglesia.
So the church begins to look more and more Roman.
Entonces, la iglesia más y más romana.
And more Christians begin serving in the government in the Roman Empire.
Y mucho más de los cristianos están sirviendo en puestos de gobierno.
And now Rome began starting passing laws based upon Christianity.
Y ahora Roma también está haciendo sus leyes en la forma de cristianismo, mirando al cristianismo.
And so all this, worldly power corrupts. So, slowly some of these bishops became corrupted.
Entonces el poder a veces influye por la corrupción y algunos de esos obispos fueron corruptidos.
And some of them started practicing simony. Do you guys know what simony is?
Uno de los obispos estaba practicando una cosa que se llama sinomía.
It's where you start buying your post. So wealthy people, upper class people would start becoming a bishop by paying for it.
Entonces sinomía era una persona más rica que estaba pagando para su puesto de obispo.
But the biggest change for the church, what do you guys think the biggest change was?
Pero el cambio más grande, ¿qué pensáis que era el cambio más grande?
H already said it once.
The power. I think that probably will be the
We
power.
talked about the power just now.
Right.
So other than the power, what do you think is the biggest change?
Aparte del poder que tuvieron el cambio.
They're not
más
persecuted
grande,
anymore.
que no fueron perseguidos.
No longer is the Christians facing persecution for their faith.
Ahora los cristianos no están perseguidos.
So ever since the time of Christ, Christians have been facing severe persecution.
Entonces, desde el momento del tiempo de Cristo, todos los cristianos fueron perseguidos.
And many of the believers had hoped for the reward of martyrdom. They saw that as a reward.
Y muchos de los cristianos han visto eso como una recompensa o una honra para dar su vida para Cristo.
They saw God's call in Revelation 1:9 as being real. That was their goal. Can somebody read Revelation 1:9?
Ellos han visto la llamada de Cristo en Apocalipsis 1:9.
Before we read it, review question from Revelation. What are the three things that Jesus calls us to?
Una persona que estaba en el
Before you
estudio
read it,
de-
before you open it,
Antes que solo hables, una persona que estaba en el estudio
Before you read
de
it,
Apocalipsis,
what are the
eran
three things?
las tres cosas que eran llamada de Dios a nosotros.
what are they?
Llamada a...
To be a priesthood,
Well,
¿cómo es que se dice?
so we're called to work in God's kingdom as a kingdom of
Trabajar
priests.
en el reino de sacerdotes,
Second
la
thing.
obra de Dios.
Second thing,
Segundo,
to endure.
patient endurance. And the third thing
perseverancia.
that God calls us to in Revelation? Suffering, tribulation. So somebody want to read that passage?
What did you
1:9 de Apocalipsis.
Verse 3.
Verse 1:9.
Oh, 1:9.
Chapter 1:9. Chapter 1, verse 9.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I, John, your brother and companion in the suffering and kingdom and patient endurance that are ours in Jesus, was on the island of Patmos because of the world. Is this right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus.
So there's those three things that Jesus calls us to in the end times. Suffering, which is literally tribulation in that passage, patient endurance, and God's kingdom.
Entonces Jesús nos llamó en los últimos días a esas tres cosas, el sufrimiento, obra en el reino de Dios como sacerdotes y la perseverancia.
So after Constantine, though, people began flooding into the church. Christians began flooding into the
Pero
church.
después de Constantino entraba mucha gente, como derrama de gente que querían ser cristianos.
And so the old order, the 5%, they were bearing the scars of persecution. They were being released from prisons, and some of them could, barely walk because of the
La
suffering.
gente más antigua fueron la gente que fueron perseguidos, entonces ellos todavía tenían cicatrices de todo su sufrimiento,
But these new Christians had no fear of persecution.
pero la gente nueva no tenía miedo de persecución
And-
porque no lo tuvieron.
And as they flooded into the church, they brought their pagan practices with them.
Pero mientras que entraba un montón de gente a la iglesia, también estaba trayendo su costumbre de la religión pagana.
And so some of these practices became secretized into the
Entonces,
church.
mucha de la práctica entre esas religiones y el cristianismo fueron como sincronizadas.
Again, this looked more like the faith of like the people that lived in the Old Testament, who God is just the most powerful of the gods.
Era más como la fe de la gente en el Antiguo Testamento que pensaba en Dios más como el Dios más poderoso de los demás dioses.
For these pagans in the Roman Empire, Christianity, the Christian God was just the biggest and baddest kid on the block.
Entonces para ellos, como que ellos criaban paganos, ellos pensaban que el Dios del cristianismo era lo mejor de todos los demás dioses, el más poderoso.
And so archaeologists have dug up tombs from this time period and found both Christian and pagan artifacts buried with people.
Entonces los arqueólogos se han encontrado entre la gente que fueron entomados con Dios de cristianismo y Dios pagano, los dos.
And so when people got sick, for example, a lot of them wouldn't go for prayer. They went back to the practice of magic.
Entonces también muchas veces cuando ellos se enfermó usaban la práctica de mágica para intentar curarse.
Another big change is no longer did the Christians have to meet in the catacombs in the cemeteries at early in the morning.
Entonces los cristianos no tenían que estar como escondidos en reuniones por la mañana porque ya no había persecución.
Now everybody, the pagans and the Christians, could worship God and the unconquered Son on Sunday.
Entonces, ahora en ese imperio los cristianos se pueden estar adorando a Dios y los paganos podrían estar adorando a sus dioses.
And so the service became like massive, just massive floods of people flocking into the church services, influenced by imperial worship.
Pero entre las iglesias había un montón de gente que estaba entrando en las iglesias.
So when you go to the imperial temple, you would offer a sacrifice or a prayer for the emperor.
Y cuando tú fuiste al templo imperio, tú fuiste con incienso o un sacrificio por el emperador.
So you would burn some incense.
Entonces quemando incienso.
So now the Christians brought incense into their churches. They started burning
Ahora
incense.
los cristianos están quemando incienso, pero en la iglesia cristiana.
And so the incense not offered up to the emperor, the incense is being offered up to God.
Entonces ahora está quemando incienso, no por el emperador, pero por Dios.
Is that a bad thing or is that a good thing or is that neutral?
¿Eso está mal o eso está bueno?
What do you guys think about that? Burning incense, bringing a pagan practice into, is that bad if it's for God at this
Still
point?
burn the incense in the Catholic
Yeah,
Church.
but it just depends how you do it. Because if you do it as a pagan thing,
Uh-huh.
taken to the new church, I think that is bad. But there are people that do it actually in this time, and they burn incense in different places, but they grow with that. They think that it's good.
But
to
is the
them.
practice bad in and of itself if you're doing it for the Lord? What do you guys think about
I
that?
think it's good.
I think it's symbolic.
Creo que esa
I
práctica
think it's
es
symbolic. There are
buena.
so many things that are symbolic.
Now the
and
church-
bad, like Christmas, there are so many things that are symbolic, but you don't know about
The
them.
church could justify it because,
Yeah.
you know, the Old Testament priests offered incense to God in the temple, right?
Entonces la iglesia podría justificarlo también porque el sacerdote de Israel también estaba quemando incienso.
So they would just say, it's not necessarily a new thing.
Entonces no necesariamente es nuevo.
Did we ever bring-
What
let
did
me-
H say? I didn't translate that.
I don't know.
I
What
think
did
it's symbolic because they were saying there's a new God.
A new God,
is a
yeah.
new God. But I don't think God gives two hoots because He's already given us Jesus, and so there's.
Are there things that we do in our churches today that aren't necessarily practiced in the early church?
Yeah, this the snake thing.
Snake. Think about something. Think about something at your church, that the church that you guys attend. What's something at your church that maybe they didn't do in the early church?
The communion, the way that
They did the communion.
Okay,
They did
I
communion.
No, I mean
haven't
the way
translated
they
Hang on,
this.
okay.
I haven't translated
Okay,
anything.
okay, go ahead, Kristen.
Que H estaba diciendo que era simbólico, pero también fue un Dios nuevo que estaba adorando. Y la última pregunta era algo de como hay cosas que tú haces en tu iglesia ahora que no son de la iglesia primitiva, ¿no?
Sí.
Cuando Gerson ha hecho la chiste de manejando o manipulando serpiente. Pero eso es el chiste.
What are some
Eso
examples?
No lo hacemos aquí en España.
What are some
Otra
examples?
cosa.
I said the communion because the way they do the communion,
The form of communion
That's
is
right.
different.
the form of communion is different.
La forma de la Santa
Mhm.
Cena.
Because in the early church, it was like a big party, everyone
Right.
was happy, and it was.
Right.
And now you have to be like that.
Right. Solemn,
and
yeah.
if you feel guilty, you cannot do it, and things
Como
like
que
that.
la Santa Cena era más como una celebración de la iglesia primitiva
Happy clapping.
y mucha más comida también. Y ahora tiene que ser muy serio y es muy distinto.
What about having a nice big worship team?
Y
Yeah,
también
yeah.
nosotros tenemos un grupo de alabanza y adoración.
Or PowerPoint presentations of your sermons?
También presentaciones digitales de PowerPoint.
Are any of these things bad?
Hay cosas de esas cosas son malas.
They're neutral, right? It depends on your intent.
Son más
Also
como
significance.
neutrales, depende de tu
And
motivación.
depends the
In
church.
the Psalms, it
But
talks
for
all
the
the time
for the
about
Music.
making a lot of
Yeah.
noise.
Right.
You know,
Right.
all the instruments, and
Right.
so I look at worship as part of what God wants.
Right.
He wants
Uh-huh.
Entonces
Yeah.
eso de tener un grupo de alabanza no es muy diferente de la gente de Israel porque tuvieron muchos instrumentos y cantaba el Señor.
One big difference is we go to
At
church.
that time
Oh,
too.
No, I was saying that depends the church because the evangelical church have big instruments and is happy clapping.
mhm,
And the Catholic Church you cannot do that.
mhm.
They will throw you away.
Right.
Porque depende de la iglesia,
It depends the
porque
church.
la iglesia evangélica es muy feliz
Yeah.
y siempre están cantando, el grupo de alabanza, pero en la iglesia católica no se puede hacer esto.
Another big
Si
difference
lo
is
hace, te echa fuera.
the church went to church all day long. We go to church for a couple hours and we're done, right? They went to church all day.
Nosotros, bueno, depende aquí en España.
Half an hour, that's too long.
La iglesia en los Estados Unidos dura poco tiempo, como 1 hora o 1 hora y media, pero la iglesia primitiva duraba mucho tiempo. Aquí es entre medio.
And so the bishops and after Constantine started wearing, the ministers started wearing luxurious robes and being referred to as priests. These things began implemented in the 4th
Después
century.
de Constantino, los obispos y los sacerdotes tuvieron como esa manta que eran como muy especiales y muy
On a practical level,
bonitos.
though, these churches were probably packed.
They
So
were
someone needed to wear something.
a uniform.
A uniform.
Yeah.
You can kind of see it.
Mhm.
It's got to be jam packed.
Massive, massive.
Entonces él lo hace un punto muy válido. Si había tantas personas, tal vez tuvo que usar ese tipo de ropa para enseñar que él era el cura que estaba predicando.
And God had sort of instigated that back in the Old Testament with the robes that
Right,
the
mhm.
priests would
Yeah,
También
they
el
still
Antiguo
pointed back to the Old
Testamento
Testament, said, you know,
llevaba ese tipo de
Túnicas, ¿no?
mantel, no sé.
the communion, another difference was that the communion table,
Túnica.
the church was centered around the meal, was replaced by the communion altar.
¿Cómo se
The
llama?
communion table was replaced by the altar.
Donde
The communion
tenía la
altar.
Santa Cena, la mesa de la Santa Cena era donde tenía el altar de...
Everybody would meet for the dinner and the meal, they'd eat the communion. After Constantine, it was replaced by the communion altar.
Ok, entonces como que estuvieron diciendo la iglesia primitiva tenía la mesa grande para comer todos juntos en la Santa Cena, pero después de Constantino ya estaba cambiando eso a tener como un altar con la mesa de la Santa Cena.
That's why on the old times the church duraba perdón, sorry.
For a long, all day.
Duraba todo el día, because no es lo mismo
Lasted all
una
day.
comida todo el día con tus
And do you think-
amigos.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Because you were
To keep
eating
tabs.
What?
Because of the amount of people they
Probably.
to try and make
How can you have
It was a
a big
gathering.
feast with hundreds of people? I don't know.
Que eso era más como comunidad, porque tú estabas con la gente de tu familia comiendo, y eso es normal que duraba mucho tiempo.
Another thing like Otto was talking about is the early church didn't kneel on Sunday. Sunday was a day of celebration. It was a mini Easter.
Entonces la iglesia primitiva como que era una celebración, un día de resurrección cada domingo.
However, because of the practice of people when they went to the imperial temples kneeled for the emperor, people began kneeling on Sundays.
Entonces en la iglesia primitiva la gente no doblaba rodilla, pero como que en la religión cuando ellos estaban adorando al emperador, sí ellos doblaban rodilla. Entonces en la iglesia después de Constantino había mucha gente que empezaron a doblar rodillas.
And the church service became this big flashy thing, and sometimes it was started by a long procession.
Y también el culto era como de más pompa, que había mucha más procesión.
And so often the church choirs were implemented to lead the procession to the church.
Y muchas veces el curro de la iglesia era lo que estaba llevando la procesión, entrando en el culto.
And eventually, the church, the regular church laity, they began having less and less and less roles in the church service. They became more and more just observers instead of
Y
participants.
esa gente, recuérdate que la gente que eran como líderes, ancianos, diáconos de la iglesia siempre estaba ayudando en la Santa Cena y otra cosa, pero ahora no tiene mucho sitio, no tiene puesto, era más o menos los obispos.
Another thing that happened is they started begin building churches on the martyrs' graves.
Y también empezaron a construir iglesias por donde fue como el cementerio de los mártires.
Remember, they would eat the communion meal on the martyr's grave on their anniversary to kind of like participate and in the catacombs and kind of like participate the whole church, the church in heaven and the church in earth.
La iglesia primitiva se fueron a los catacumbos. Catacumbas para tener como una celebración allí, para que los mártires que estaban en el cielo era como que simbólico que todo estaba haciendo celebración junto todavía.
And then they started digging up the bones of Saint Bob and bringing them into the church.
Ya empezaron a excavar los huesos de Santo Roberto,
And they would
pero
bury
Santo
them.
cualquiera.
And they would bury them under the altar.
Y se quitaban los huesos y se fueron para poner debajo del altar.
Helena, the mother of Constantine, went on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and while she was there, she built a lot of really nice basilicas.
Including the Church of Nativity.
Mm-hmm.
Que Elena, que era la madre de Constantino, se fue a un peregrinaje a Israel y allí construyó muchas diferentes iglesias o basílicas.
She built the Church of the Nativity, and she built one on the Mount of Olives.
Una era la iglesia de la Natividad, que es muy famoso, y otro también por el Monte Olivio.
And she also claimed to have found the cross of Jesus Christ.
Y ella también
I'm not
proclamó que ella
Maybe.
se encontró
Maybe
a
not. Probably
la cruz de Jesucristo.
But the wood from this cross was said to have amazing power.
Y ha dicho que también cada pedazo de la madera de la cruz tuvo mucho poder.
And so all over the kingdom, little fragments of the cross of Jesus started popping up in all these
Entonces, por todo
basilicas.
el reino de romano había como fragmentos de madera que la gente dijeron que era de la cruz de Jesucristo.
Now, as you can imagine, the old order of Christians were not happy with these changes, just like when old people are not happy with changes in our churches today.
Puedes imaginar como que la gente antigua o más vieja no estaba bien con los cambios de la iglesia.
And they felt like it was being forced upon them.
Entonces también pensó que eso fue como esforzado por ellos.
People were rushing to the church to be baptized, converted so quickly that they didn't even have time to prepare people for baptism.
Había tantas personas entrando a la iglesia y el cristianismo y quería ser bautizado que no tenía tiempo para preparar a ellos por el bautismo.
And I think the church was overwhelmed.
Y era como que la iglesia estaba como agotada.
And a lot of people were just getting baptized and they really didn't know what they were doing.
Y muchos de ellos fueron bautizados, pero no entendía el bautismo.
So the church kind of became divided over these new developments.
Entonces la iglesia fue como dividido por esas diferentes cosas.
So a lot of people welcomed the new Christendom with open arms.
Y mucha gente decía, bueno, queremos todos los cristianos, entonces vamos a dar el bienvenido a todos.
They saw the hand of God at work directly in the conversion of Rome.
Ha visto como el mano de Dios que estaba convirtiendo a esa gente.
They saw God's kingdom advancing on the earth through Christendom.
Y avanzando el reino de Dios por medio del cristianismo.
And the vision was that soon, maybe the whole world will receive Jesus through the work of God,
que
through
tal
the
vez
empire.
toda la gente del mundo se convirtieran y recibieran a Cristo por medio del Imperio Romano.
And this would usher in Jesus Christ.
Y ya vendrá Jesucristo.
So normally, this view of eschatology is referred to as postmillennialism.
Entonces esa forma de ver escatología se llama postmillennial.
But this was a hard pill to swallow for the old order
Pero esa era como pastilla difícil a tragar por la gente del antiguo orden.
They valued the hard labor for Jesus Christ,
Porque ellos tenían más valor en la obra más difícil para
the
Jesucristo.
patient endurance,
En la perseverancia.
and the suffering for the
Y
sake of
en
the
el
cross.
sufrimiento por Jesucristo.
So Rome, since the time of Jesus, had been the enemy of God.
Entonces Roma desde la época de Jesucristo era como el enemigo de Dios.
The church had always interpreted Rome as being the Babylon in Revelation,
La iglesia primitiva siempre ha interpretado a Roma como Babilonia que estaba en Apocalipsis.
who would be judged and crushed by God.
Y que Roma eventualmente sería juzgado y crujido por Dios.
So the early Christians were all premillennials.
Entonces los cristianos que eran de la iglesia primitiva era premilenial.
They always held on to that hope of the imminent return of Jesus at
Sí.
any moment
Siempre tenía la esperanza que Cristo vendrá eminentemente
that would lead to the fall of Rome.
y eso sería también la caída de Roma.
And the emperor had always been seen as an antichrist.
Y el emperador era anticristo.
These Christians fled to Syria and in the desert.
Pero estos cristianos en esa época se huyeron al desierto.
So this was the birthing of the monastic movement, the monks.
Entonces eso era el movimiento de los
Monásticos.
monásticos.
And others saw the imperial church as sinful and apostate.
Y otros han visto a la iglesia imperio como llena de pecado y como apostata.
And they separated themselves from the church.
Entonces ellos lo han separado a sí mismo de la iglesia.
And we'll talk about this later.
Y vamos a hablar más de eso más adelante.
But, you know, in conclusion, the church had a lot of new opportunities,
En conclusión, la iglesia tuvieron muchas oportunidades nuevas,
but they also had a lot of new dangers.
pero también tenía muchos peligros también.
And for a lot of the new Christians, it was just about switching loyalties from the emperor to Christ.
Y por mucho de la gente que eran cristianos era cambiar su fealdad, su fidelidad desde el emperador a Cristo.
There's one more person I have to talk about. That's Eusebius that I have written on the board.
El último de quien vamos a hablar es Eusebio.
He was the most learned Christian of his time.
Eusebio era como el empellono de su tiempo.
Does anybody remember who he is? We've mentioned him a couple times.
El estudioso de su tiempo.
Anybody remember who Eusebius is?
¿Alguien recuerda a Eusebio?
I knew his name, but I don't remember.
He is the personal historian of Constantine.
No.
Era el historiador personal de Constantino.
In fact, about half of what we know about the early church, we know because of him.
La mitad de lo que sabemos de la iglesia primitiva es por medio de él.
He was born in around the year 260 in Palestine,
Que él nació en el año 260 en Palestina.
and he trained up in Caesarea in the line of the Origenist school.
Fue entrenado en Cesarea y en la escuela de Orgenes.
Remember, Origen moved his school to Caesarea,
Orgenes se mudó toda su escuela a Cesarea.
and Origen brought all of his library to Caesarea.
Y toda su biblioteca también ahí.
And ever since he had died until Eusebius, it had been added to. So this was a
Y
massive
desde el momento
collection.
que él murió, él estaba poniendo libros ahí,
And
añadiendo libros en la biblioteca.
Eusebius started traveling around all the known world and collecting all the Christian
Entonces,
documents he could find.
Eusebio también estaba viajando a todas las partes del imperio buscando otros libros cristianos.
And his mentor was persecuted and killed in the year 303 under Diocletian's persecution.
Y su mentor fue perseguido y matado debajo de Diocleciano cuando había tanto persecución.
And he escaped because in this time, if you didn't have the call of martyrdom on your life, the responsible thing to do as a Christian was to escape martyrdom, unless you had the call.
Él se escapó porque él pensó, si yo no tengo la llamada específicamente de ser mártir, yo debo de escapar.
So he was the first church historian. He wrote church history and the life of Constantine.
Él era el historiador primitivo.
But remember, before Constantine liberated, everybody in the East saw Constantine as the liberator of the Christians because they were still under persecution.
Había mucha gente que han visto a Constantino como librador de los cristianos.
And so Eusebius and others saw God's direct hand involved in Constantine bringing down their persecutors.
Entonces Eusebio y los demás han visto a hermano derecho de Dios que estaba crujiendo a la gente que estaba persiguiendo a ellos.
Eusebius finds himself in the middle of a big theological storm, which we'll talk about later.
Y Eusebio tiene como una tormenta teológica que vamos a discutir.
But when Constantine came to Caesarea, Bishop Eusebius honored him with a very nice speech.
Pero cuando Constantino se fue a Cesarea, el obispo Eusebio le ha dado la honra por un tiempo de hablar muy bien de él.
Now it's clear that it was Eusebius who began moving the church, the needle from premillennium to postmillennialism.
Y Eusebio también estaba cambiando poco a poco teología de premilenial a postmillennial.
And he was a bishop too.
But the
No,
theology
obispo
wasn't
y
developed yet. It was just
historiador.
some of the ideas in his writings.
Pero su teología fue desarrollada.
That Christianity is the final goal of human history.
Que el cristianismo es la recta final de toda la
And
historia.
God's kingdom would be fully established on the earth
Y que su reino sería completamente establecido por la tierra.
before Jesus returns, which refers to
Antes
the
que
post.
regresará a Jesucristo.
Jesus returns after the millennium.
Porque Jesús regresará después de milenial con postmilenial forma de pensar.
All right, so that's where we're going to stop today. I got 5 group questions.
Y paramos, pero tenemos 5 preguntas.
Question number 1, what is a proper response to imperialism? Reinforce, subvert, or define, and why?
¿Cuál es la respuesta apropiada de imperialismo? Reforzarse, subvertir o definir y por qué.
The new church under Constantine, good, bad, or something else?
La iglesia nueva por debajo de Constantino era bueno, malo o algo o otra cosa.
Third question, how was God's hand in the conversion of the empire?
¿Y cómo era el mano de Dios en la conversión del emperador o imperio?
Question 4, put yourself in the shoes of the old order of Christians. How are you feeling?
Si tú estás andando en los zapatos de el orden antiguo de los cristianos, lo que eran mayores, ¿cómo te sentirías?
Can we trust the history of Eusebius?
¿Nosotros podremos confiar la historia de Eusebio?
All right, that's where we're going to stop today. We'll see you guys next week.
Dios te bendiga.